Hello, dear sir, Dr. Alexander. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
I'm very thankful that you spared some time and you joined us in this session and give us a great opportunity of learning. Uh, I'm really thankful. I'm really thankful.
Thank you for having me.
It's our player, sir. It's our player. And this is something very excellent that a professor who is head of Islamic Studies in University of Michigan, and that particular program is, uh, I guess, this is part of Saint Petersburg State University of Russia, and I'm very excited to host you today because you have just wrote few books about Sufism, and your special interest is Sufism. This is wonderful. This is wonderful.
Thank you.
And now I will request you to start with your topic of uh, the session, and we would love to hear about it.
Thank you, sir. I would like to talk today about Sufism and society. Um, in the early Sufi literature, we find a lot of discussion of how Sufis should see the world, whether the world is evil or it is good, or it is something in between. And Sufis had to choose how to deal with the world. So early Sufi masters, such as Abu Nasr al-Sarraj al-Tusi, al-Qushayri al-Sulami, actually devote a lot of attention to the internal life of Sufis. I hope you can see the PowerPoint here, which says Sufis and Society. Sufis devote a lot of attention to the internal life and perfection in worship of God by individual ascetics and mystics. That is Sufism. The world in the eyes of early Sufi theorists and writers was of little value. They were preoccupied with a parallel world of true realities, haqa'iq in Arabic. So they thought that this imperfect world of ours is not worth much attention. However, Sufis still had to live among people, to interact with the people of the marketplace, the bazaar, with their families, with their friends, peers, and they also had to sustain their families. They tried to do this while keeping their eyes and hearts on God, on interactions with God, on experiencing God's presence in their lives. Muhammad al-Ghazali, the great Muslim theologian and Sufi master, tried to address issues of being in the world while also being aloof from it. So this will be the topic of my today's presentation. I'll say a few words about general discussions of mysticism and its place in society. And here I would like to mention the ideas of the German, of the German scholar Max Weber, who talked about innerworldly versus otherworldly types of ascetic and mystical experience. So Sufis, like all mystics, realize that one cannot remain permanently immersed in the contemplation of God and the divine mystery. They have to live in a society and be subject to the imperatives that are current in that society. To secure for themselves the leisure to engage in otherworldly oriented practices, they had to leave their spiritual retreat, in Arabic it's called khalwa, in order to earn their livelihood. So, in other words, their interaction with the realities of this world, not the other world, was essential for their survival. However, this engagement with society, with the world, had consequences, which I will discuss later. The Sufis were trying very hard in the Middle Ages to find a felicitous compromise between being in this world and while at the same time avoiding its treacherous enticements. I already mentioned Muhammad al-Ghazali, Abu Hamid Muhammad al-Ghazali, who died in 1111, a date that is so easy to remember. In his famous book, The Revival or Revivification of Sciences of Religion, Ihya Ulum ad-Din, he actually somewhat paradoxically says that fleeing from the world is much easier than engaging with it. And thus, the flight from the world, about which Max Weber said, some mystics flee the world, others remain in it. So the flight from the world, according to Al-Ghazali, the Sunni theologians of the Middle Ages, was less meritorious in the eyes of God. In order to break one's animal soul, an-nafs, Al-Ghazali says, it is one should live in the midst of ordinary people and suffer from their abuse, ridicule, and moral imperfection. In other words, life in the crowd is more conducive than retreat from taming one's animal appetitive soul that commands evil according to the Quran. So subduing the soul is the ultimate goal of every ascetic mystic, and according to Al-Ghazali, one should subject oneself to the temptations of being in this world. To flee the world, it's easy. To stay in the world while remaining committed to God and to practicing contemplation of divine mystery, it's much more difficult than just saving oneself by withdrawing from the crowd. So Al-Ghazali says that Sufi teachers should instruct their followers, the inhabitants of Sufi lodges. He uses the word ribatat. Ribat is an outpost on the border between the Muslim world and non-Muslim world, but it also is a name for the Sufi community, or for the Sufi compound, where Sufis lived a shared life of engagement and dedication to God. So this communities, to some extent, Sufi lodges, remind us of Christian monasteries in Catholic Europe. So Sufis lived in these compounds, and Al-Ghazali says that living in such institutions is fine, but Sufis should leave the protective walls of these compounds to engage with the world outside their cozy world of camaraderie and fellowship. And venturing outside the walls of the Sufi compounds, of the Sufi lodges, they are tempted, they become victims to the enticements of the world. And if you are ready to and eager to resist this enticement, that will be the ultimate test of your commitment to God. So Al-Ghazali was not the sole voice in the chorus of Sufi voices, encouraging encouraging Sufis to reach out to the masses of the common folk and to serve them by praying for them, by dispensing divine blessing, barakah, to them. The very famous North African historian, some consider him even the founder of modern sociology, Ibn Khaldun, who died in 1406 in Egypt, brings home the same message that Al-Ghazali tried to broadcast during his lifetime. So it's 300 years later. Ibn Khaldun says that the Prophet encouraged in his teachings to strike a delicate balance between serving God and heeding the demands of human nature. So that means, according to Ibn Khaldun, again, being in the crowd while not being influenced by its misdeeds, its sinful behavior. In fact, you should be trying to uplift your fellow believers. So like Al-Ghazali before him, Ibn Khaldun advises aspiring Sufis to mix, he uses the word mukhalata in Arabic, which literally means mixing with people as opposed to secluding themselves from society, which he calls uzla, that is isolation. Now, about 400 years later, the same idea is reiterated by the Maghribi Sufi named Ibn Ajiba, who died in 1809. So we see, again, a line of thinking, the same line of thinking stretching from Al-Ghazali through Ibn Khaldun to the Maghribi Sufi Ibn Ajiba. Commenting on the Quran, Surah 25, verse 20, that describes the biblical and Qur'anic prophets as eating food and walking in the markets, he argues that this description is fully applicable to Sufi friends of God, or awliya. This word is usually translated into English as saints, but I think friends of God, or those who are under God's protection, is a better translation for awliya. So the awliya, the Sufi saints or Sufi friends of God, should also walk through the markets, rub shoulders with the crowds, eat with the people of the bazaar, if only for the sake of experience and self-perfection, or self-reflection rather. In other words, they should be with the people, but they should be, again, focused on God's presence in the crowds of common folk. Paradoxically, says Ibn Ajiba, in the hustle and bustle, he uses the word ziham, of the marketplaces, Sufis can catch the glimpses of God's presence, thereby becoming closer to him. That is God. Well before it was formulated by Ibn Ajiba, a Maghribi Sufi of the Shadhili Darqawi Sufi order, this principle had become the predominant way of dealing with the world among the Sufis of the Naqshbandiya Sufi order that traces its origin to the Central Asian mystic named Baha'u'ddin Naqshband, who lived in what today is Central Asia in Bukhara, and his dates of are 1318 through 1398. He articulated in Persian this principle of being in the crowd while staying mentally with God as khalwa dar anjuman, solitude in society or crowd. And this precept remains the guiding principle of the Sufi order. The same applies to the North African Shadhiliya, the brotherhood to which Ibn Ajiba belonged, indicating that regardless of where Sufis were, many of them arrived at the same conclusion about the position of the Sufi vis-a-vis the society, in regard to the society. In more recent time, this principle has been given another notable rearticulation in the teaching of the controversial Turkish religious thinker Fethullah Gülen. Fethullah Gülen, who is currently in exile in the United States, in Pennsylvania, he fled from the government first of Republican Turkey, and now he is number one on the enemy list of the President Erdogan, the president of Turkey. So regardless of his political involvement, what is interesting about Gülen that he, like the Sufis of old, insists that his followers, who are maybe described as neo-Sufis, should not only live among the masses of believers, but also provide essential public services to them, especially education. This precept, which comes from the Arabic khidma, and in Persian it's pronounced, in Turkish it's pronounced hizmet, means service. So the provision of services is part of being in the crowd of the common believers. And this idea of serving the society or serving local communities, hizmet, has given name to the entire movement headed by Gülen, the hizmet movement. The original modus operandi of a Sufi-based group like Gülen may have changed, but the underlying Sufi principle of being with God in the crowd has remained the same. Thanks in large part to the Ghazalian or Al-Ghazali's principle of being physically in the world with its inhabitants while spiritually remaining aloof from its enticements, Sufism, a tradition of intensive interiorization, re-exteriorized its results and has finally been able to provide an important basis for social order. Perhaps more than their peers in any other major cultural environment, the Sufis succeeded in combining spiritual elitism with a social populism. I'm quoting here a famous American scholar, Marshall G.S. Hodgson, who wrote a book, The Venture of Islam, and he has a whole chapter on Sufism as the mainstay of social order. I'm quoting from that chapter. So I will stop here, and I will be happy to take questions from you about Sufism and the world and different attitudes that Sufis developed in dealing with the dilemma of being in the world whilst being aloof from it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was enlightening for us all. Um, I would like to ask you in the beginning that how you see the socio-political movements of Sufis of today, especially after Golan. Uh, it is now in talks of the town that Sufis are capable of bringing or some kind of socio-political movements. They can lead some kind of socio-political movements.
Thank you, Pierre Mudassir. It's a wonderful question. I actually wanted to start the conversation by saying how medieval Sufis engaged with society, but now we can talk about the modern period. And you are absolutely right. Sufis are extremely active in political life. In some areas, they even founded states. wholesales. For instance, in Libya, the founder and the king was a member of the Sanusiya Sufi order. So the modern country of Libya owes its existence to the activities of the Sanusiya Sufi order, which was very active in anti-colonial struggle. They fought against the Italians, and the leader, Sheikh Mukhtar, of the Libyan Sufi movement, the Sanusiya Sufi movement, was executed by the Italians. They hanged him for engaging in anti-colonial struggle. We find a similar situation in the Sudan. Sudan owes its existence to the activities of several Sufi groups. The Mahdiya movement and the uprising of Mahdi is famous because it led to the death of the British General Gordon, who was killed in fighting the Murids, the Sufi followers of al-Mahdi and his successors. So we see Sufis also actively engaged in anti-colonial struggle in Algeria. The leader of the Algerian rebellion, Sheikh Abdel Qadir, was exiled by the French authority after putting up furious resistance to the French occupation of Algeria in 1820. So he was eventually captured, sent to Marseille, and then sent to Turkey, to Bursa, and eventually ended his days in Damascus, in Syria, where he played a very active role in reconciling the local Christian and Muslim communities. So now moving on to today's time, you're probably interested in what Sufis are doing today. Today, the Sufis are seen by the authorities as a rule, as a safe bet, as a better alternative to the so-called Salafis, or neo-fundamentalists. So neo-fundamentalists are very active on the political playing field. Sufis are today less active, and therefore the authorities cultivate Sufis. They provide support for their communities, for their lodges, for their sheikhs, because they hope to gain legitimacy among the Muslim masses by supporting the people whom the masses admire, the Sufi sheikhs, the Sufi peers, the Sufi masters, the Sufi murshids, ustads, they're different words. So unfortunately, that undermines the reputation of Sufis when it's like a kiss of death to Sufis when the authorities who are seen as corrupt or illegitimate or inept, when they are resented by the masses, and when they support Sufis, it's like a kiss of death for the Sufi communities because the masses turn to alternatives. But not every sheikh is subject to bribe. Sometimes sheikhs are very active in criticizing their authorities. In so doing, they're perpetuating the old Sufi tradition of standing up to authorities and protected their communities from the exactions of the powers that be. So I will stop here and allow it. The long and short of it, yes, Sufis remain active, remain engaged, but the situation has changed. If they were at first in the 19th, 18th centuries, they were the bulwark of opposition to colonialism in many areas. In some areas, they collaborated, I must say, but in many areas, they were very strongly opposed to the imposition of colonial rule of the French, British, Italians, as we saw in the case of Libya. Then today, they are more interested in refining their spirituality and helping their followers to gain spiritual, intellectual, and moral ethical purity. So, however, they remain the object of machinations sometimes by the state authorities who hope to profit by their popularity among the masses. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I completely agree with you. And now, how you see Sufis among two bigger communities, not in number but in influence, like Shias and Salafis. Both are having different states behind them. Like Iran is very active, a Shia state, backing its community everywhere in the region. And likewise, Salafis, they have Gulf states behind them. The whole Salafi movement is having a strong backing of Gulf states. And Sufis are kind of decentralized, kind of they are not monotone, or they are not unified internationally, or they are not having any kind of support from any state or states.
Mhm. Well, as I say, in some areas, Sufis are supported. For instance, in Morocco. But because you're talking about your particular region, I'm less familiar with your region. I specialize in the Arab world. So if you, Pierre Mudassar, if you say that in your part of the Muslim world, authorities are not supporting Sufis, but rather they're supporting Shias or Salafis, I can see why this happens, and the situation with Sufis differs from one place to another. Why the authorities are not actively promoting Sufis? Maybe the authorities are very secular, and they believe that Sufism is a thing of the past and that it has no place in a modern society, because the modern society should be based on indifference to religion, secularism. So because most of the leaders in your part of the world are West educated, so they take a more or less Protestant position vis-a-vis the Sufis. Like the Catholics embraced monasticism and mysticism and spirituality, whereas Protestants thought it was also outdated way of practicing Christianity. The Christian Revolution, the Protestant Revolution, took place in 1517, Martin Luther, and then all the Protestant states went after the local monastic monasteries, monastic communities. The same happened in the Muslim world in Turkey. When Kemal Atatürk came to power, he thought that because he was Western-trained military officer, he saw in Sufism an outdated way of unifying the nation. He promoted nationalism over against religion, spirituality, which he considered to be a cause of the decline of the Ottoman Empire, and he wanted to revive the newly founded Turkish Republic on the basis of secular ideology. So he prohibits all religious communities, including Sufis, confiscates their properties, deprives them of material support, and this attitude continued uninterrupted until the 1990s. So from the 1920s until 1990s, when finally the new authorities, which reflected the will of the majority of Turks, turned the tide. Now the secularists are marginalized, and many followers of Sufi institutions, especially the Naqshbandiya, and they have local Ismailiya and others, they became, they are making a comeback. So in your part of the world, as I say, the situation probably is that secularists continue to dominate the public space and impose their ideas about what is correct for the society and what is not correct. From their viewpoint, Sufism is an ideology of the past and practice of the past that has no place in that brave new world they're trying to build.
Yeah. Situation is a bit different in my part of the world, because the secularism is not a challenge for Sufi communities here in my part of the world, but the influence of Wahhabism and Sufism is the challenge here we are facing day-to-day basis. And it sometimes this leads to an extent of extremism, and that turns into violent extremism when it comes uh, the matter of inspiration from Al Qaeda or Taliban, and then we witness the emerge of TTP in Pakistan, Tehrik-e-Taliban in Pakistan, and then there is a long story of terrorism, uh, which is now of 2 decades. But sir, as your area of expertise, Arab world, how you see the balance between Sufis and Salafis in particular in the Arab region, where the states are, especially when we talk about Gulf, Saudi Arabia is there, UAE is there, Kuwait, Bahrain. So we see that these states are officially backing Salafism and Salafi ideology, and of course countering Sufism. So how you see the balance in between Salafism and Sufism in specific that region?
Thank you so much, sir. It's a great question. Wahhabism and Sufism is one of the topics I have addressed in my publications. I took several case studies. The North Caucasus in southern Russia, and another one in South Arabia, Hadramaut. In your part of the world, definitely Wahhabis are supported by the Gulf states. There's no doubt about it. In Russia, among the Muslims of Russia, this sort of support is called dollar Islam. That is, they provide dollars. They purchase automobiles for the leaders who recruit to their cause younger people by giving them small amounts of money as grants to set up this smaller Jamaats communities. And these communities are very politically active, and they espouse a very puritanical version of Islam. So they actually enforce the strictest version of Islam in the same way as the Taliban did in Afghanistan when they ruled, when they destroyed all, for instance, tape recordings, audio cassettes, because they contained music which they considered to be illegitimate. This is the most rigid interpretation, because music, as you know, is a controversial issue in Islam, but even the Prophet didn't prohibit wedding songs and other performances he observed in Medina. He said, "These people, it's their custom, let them do them what they do." So then there were disagreements among early founders of the madhahib, of the legal schools, over the legitimacy of music. You don't have to take the most strict and rigid interpretation. The Islamic tradition is so rigid, you can find all kinds of rukhas. Rukhsa is, as you know, it's dispensation, which allows even the use of music, and Quran recitation is a musical performance, especially in Egypt. It's when the Quran is sung to melodies, Hijazi, then Ajami, and so forth. So it's an art. How can you resist that? So the Wahhabis choose the most rigid, the most inflexible interpretations from this very rich tradition, which allows you a whole array of possible choices and options, gives you options to choose from. So, but Wahhabis, to some extent, they represent this Protestant spirit of rejecting saint worship, what they call it, rejecting false idols like statues of saints, which the Catholics worship and used to carry in processions, visits to the tomb of the saints, and decorating their churches with beautiful icons, with beautiful pictures, paintings. So that was the Protestant reaction to Catholicism. To some extent, we can see parallels between the Protestant rejection of images, music, this very rule book mentality, and the Sufi or mystical ascetic Islam or Catholicism in Christianity, which allowed the use of music, which allowed artistic expression in the places of worship, which thought that art and sentiment and human emotions should be present in the places of worship. So today, the Wahhabis want to create this rule book mentality Islam with the help of the wealthy countries in the Gulf. I have no doubt about it. However, at the same time, we should understand why this version of Islam is attractive to certain elements within your society. Just saying that they are wrong is not enough. We as scholars, we try to find out what attracts the youth to this new, unprecedented, rigid, strict versions of Islam, as this Islam is interpreted by this Saudi clerics, by the Saudi scholars, and so what makes this version attractive? Is it just the financial aspect that if you join, you will be paid from the oil dollars, from the oil wealth of this country, or there are deeper reasons, and that's something you should know better than me, because you live in that society and you interact with this young men who are being indoctrinated by the Wahhabi emissaries who were trained in the Gulf and bring their ideas of what the correct Islam is with them and try to disseminate it.
Thank you, sir. I agree with you that which you call the dollar Islam, we used to call it petrodollar Islam.
Yeah.
And this whole phenomena, which politically raised by the Sufi regime when they challenged this political scenario of Ottoman Empire, and then they started conquering the lands and stuff like that. They have done stuff like that. I feel that now they are just going exhaust with the idea of rigid Islam. Like when we see the policies of MBS in Saudi Arabia, now he is becoming more and more secular, and he is opening the society day by day. He wants acceptance by the international world, and I am optimist that now they will provide space to different faith groups and give a little liberty slowly and gradually. What are your thoughts about it?
I'm not sure I understood your question correctly, so correct me, please, if I address the issue not in the way that you expected. So I would say that today the Wahhabi establishment is more tolerant towards Sufism in their own society. They are more concerned about the mujahids who are operating in Saudi Arabia, who are attacking the oil installations. and they also are present in Yemen. Those very fundamentalist group, take no prisoners group, who fight against the police forces in Saudi Arabia and then escape across the border to Yemen. I worked in Yemen and lived, so I know this firsthand. I also, so maybe the Wahhabi establishment realized that cultivating just one version of Islam is very rigid. They are creating a monster that might consume them all themselves. So they now today Sufi communities in Yemen, for instance, fundraise in Saudi Arabia, not just among the Yemeni immigrants who work in Saudi Arabia, but also among Saudis who live in Saudi Arabia and who have been brought up in the Wahhabi tradition. So, and they fundraise quite successfully. The Alawiya Sufi brotherhoods in Tarim, in Hadramaut, they benefit from the donations from the Gulf, from individuals and groups who now believe that Sufism is not that dangerous, that there is some value in it, because it promotes tolerance towards people you disagree with. Sufis do not judge people, as you very well know, by their appearance, whereas the Wahhabis always think about the length of your trousers, how you stick whether you stick the trousers in your socks or not. The length of the beard matters. Your outward appearance, zahir, that is, your externals matter for them. Sufis are more interested in the internal life. So they may see under a very unseemly appearance the value of human existence, of being, the soul. So that is a very appealing aspect of Sufism, that they don't judge people by externals, by appearances, because appearances deceive, as we very well know. So I think that's an attractive aspect of Sufis that are that people should discover and should encourage. That external appearances may be very, very deceiving, and a person you consider to be pious can be drinking whiskey in the privacy of his house, although he then goes out in this outfit that shows his piety. That's what Hassan al-Basri, one of the first Sufis, actually later Sufis say that he was our father. Our whole tradition starts from. He lived in Basra, and he said, you should examine your soul while going to the mosque. If you're going there just to show off your piety, then it's a wrong motive. You should better stay at home and pray there. That people will think that you're not very pious, but it's better for your spiritual well-being than being seen as better than you actually are. So this is the Sufi introspection is the attractive feature that definitely Wahhabism doesn't have. It lacks this interiorization of religion, which I described in my. And I think it's very valuable to all Muslims who live across the Muslim world. Something they can definitely use in contemporary societies in their interactions with human beings. I myself have learned a lot from Sufis in terms of my own personal attitude to life and my mental state. So I owe a lot to Sufism for my own self-fashioning, so to say. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, truly. Thank you, Professor Alexander, for your time, for your lovely talk. And I will request you, I know that you are a busy man, you are having so much to do, but I will request you to give us time more often, or whenever it is available, and join us in more sessions. We will learn from you, and that was a great experience talking to you, learning from you. Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, the pleasure was all mine. So we can talk about the next discussion as long as you give me a warning in advance or a notice in advance. Then we'll find the time that works for you and me. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Stay blessed.
Yeah.